They'll be doing Nebraska. Uh, Nebraska's head coach, Matt Rhule, is entering his second season as the head coach there, and he's been a head coach at two other college programs before Nebraska, and at both places. He had a really bad first season, and Nebraska had a bad season last year, and then he had a big improvement in year two, and I think that will kind of be the case at Nebraska. There'll be an improved team in his second season there, but I don't think that they're going to be a great team yet. Uh, Nebraska does return a whole lot of production. They return 77%. So first, I'll talk some about their roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So starting on the offensive side, they were horrible on this side of the ball last year, and it was really just the passing, the quarterback, and the wide receivers. Starting at quarterback, they used several different quarterbacks last season, and they were all awful. They had one of the worst quarterback situations in the country last year, and they ranked 126 in passing yards last season. But there is hope that their quarterback situation is going to be much better this year. They bring in a five-star quarterback, one of the top, not just quarterback recruits of 2024, but one of the top overall recruits of 2024, Dylan Raiola, who was at first going to play for Georgia, but then switched his commitment to Nebraska. And he looked really good in the spring game, completing 16 of 22 passes for 239 and throwing two touchdown passes. And as bad as Nebraska was at quarterback last season, I think they'll start him as a true freshman at quarterback this season, and I think that's what they should do. Because I know normally you wouldn't want to start a true freshman at quarterback, but I know he's going to make some mistakes. But as bad as they were last season, I can't imagine that he would be as bad. Even if he's like Disaster Aller over at Penn State, he would be better than the quarterbacks Nebraska had last season. Uh, so then at wide receiver, they've improved here too. They bring in two good wide receivers from the transfer portal. They bring in Jamal Banks from Wake Forest, who had last season 59 catches for 653 and four touchdowns, averaging 11.1 a catch. And they bring in a wide receiver, Isaiah Nayer, who has spent the last two seasons at Texas, but has never really played for them because of an injury. But in 2021, he was at Wyoming and had a good season, catching 44 passes for 878 and 12 touchdowns, averaging a really impressive 20 yards per catch. And they have Isaiah Garcia Castaneda at wide receiver, who has been at Nebraska these past two seasons, but has barely played for them. Last season it was because of an injury. But in 2021, he was at New Mexico State and in 10 games there had 37 catches for 578 and four touchdowns, averaging 15.6 a catch. So I think those three will be the starting wide receivers this season. So they should be pretty good at wide receiver with the starters. So then at running back, this is kind of concerning because they don't have any proven great running backs on their roster. They do return Emmett Johnson, who is likely going to be the starting running back this season. He was their starting running back the last six games last season and played in nine games and had on 90 carries, 411 yards and two touchdowns, averaging 4.6 a carry. And then on the offensive line, they are strong here. They returned four starters from an offensive line that helped Nebraska rank second last season in the Big Ten in rushing yards. And, like I just said, Nebraska didn't have great running backs last season. So that was impressive for their offensive line. And then on the defensive side, their defense was overall good last season, especially at stopping the run. They ranked eight in the country at that, only allowing 92.9 rushing yards per game. And they returned seven starters from their defense last season. They returned every starter on their defensive line. They returned Jamari Butler, who played in 11 games last season and had 34 tackles and five and a half sacks and two pass breakups and a forced fumble. And then they have Nash Hutmacher, who had 40 tackles and four and a half sacks and two pass breakups last season. And they have T.Y. Robinson, who had 29 tackles and a sack and six pass breakups and a fumble recovery and 12 total pressures last season. And at linebacker, they returned John Bullock, who had 50 tackles and one and a half sacks and two pass breakups and a forced fumble last season. And they also have Javen Wright, who only started one game last season, but played in all 12 and still had 51 tackles and two pass breakups and two interceptions and a forced fumble. And then their secondary overall looks good. Their safeties look really good. They return Isaac Gifford, who was probably the best player on their team last season. He had 86 tackles and eight pass breakups and an interception last season. He's one of the best safeties in the Big Ten. And they also have Malcolm Hartzog, who had 40 tackles and six pass breakups. And they also have Marquise Buford, who missed 8 games last season with an injury, but in 2022 had in 11 games 59 tackles and two interceptions and three pass breakups. And then at cornerback, they returned Tommy Hill, who is good. He had last season 26 tackles and nine pass breakups and four interceptions and a fumble recovery. But the other starting corner is questionable. And then on special teams, they return both specialists, but they do have to do better here. They ranked 90th in punting last season, and their kicker missed 6 of 15 field goal attempts. So now moving on to the predictions. So they start the season against UTEP, which should be a blowout win. They should beat them by like 30 points. And then Colorado. So, Colorado got treated like they had beaten the 1995 Nebraska team when they beat Nebraska last season. And I think Nebraska will be much more prepared for this game this season. I think their defense will play better this year against Colorado. Now, Colorado will probably still score some in this game because they've got a good quarterback and several good wide receivers. But Colorado is one-dimensional offensively. They can't run the football. They've got no offensive line and no defensive line either. Nebraska will dominate Colorado at the line of scrimmage in this game, and Nebraska with Dylan Raiola playing quarterback. Even though he'll probably make some mistakes in this game, I think they'll score a lot more in this game than they did last season against Colorado. And Colorado just has two good defensive backs, and other than that, they have no defense. I do think that this game will be close, but I think Nebraska gets revenge. Then they play Northern Iowa, which will be a huge blowout win. Then they play Illinois, which I think will be a game that Nebraska wins by around 2 touchdowns. Illinois is just a horrible team. They're not very good offensively, and they're not very good defensively. Nebraska is just much better. So then they play on the road at Purdue. Not a tough place to play, and another horrible team. I think Nebraska should beat Purdue by at least 2 touchdowns. If they lose to teams like Illinois and Purdue, then they're going to have another really bad season. And that team before was actually Northern Iowa. I know it showed Northern Illinois on here, but that was an accident. Then they play Rutgers at home, a game that I think is going to be low scoring. Both teams have pretty good defenses, but Rutgers' offense is so one dimensional. Well, Nebraska's offense, I don't think is going to be like that this year. And Rutgers, I just don't think is going to be able to score hardly anything in this game because Rutgers is a team that is going to have to run the football. And against Nebraska's defensive line and linebackers, I don't think Rutgers is going to have that much success doing that in this game. And Rutgers, their offensive line is not great. So I think Nebraska wins a close one. So then they're playing Indiana on the road. So I realize Indiana is not a tough place to play, and they're not supposed to be a good team at all. But the week after this, Nebraska has a game against Ohio State, and if my predictions come true, they'll be undefeated at this point. So I think they'll probably kind of overlook Indiana, and Indiana I think is going to be better than they're expected to be. And I think that they'll be good enough to take advantage of Nebraska, who I think is a better team than Indiana, but is going to be, I think, not playing their best in this game. So I'm going with the upset. So then Ohio State. This game, I think, will show that Nebraska has still got a long ways to go from being close to the top of the Big Ten. I think Ohio State will blow them out. Ohio State, think, will score a whole lot of points in this game. I don't think Nebraska's defense will have much luck slowing them down. And Dylan Raiola, a true freshman quarterback, I don't think is going to have much success at all against Ohio State's defense. They're really good everywhere defensively. So I don't think they'll be able to score much in this game. So then they play UCLA at home. So UCLA, I don't think is going to be horrible this year like they're expected to be. Of course, I know they did lose a lot in their coach, but they were able to keep a decent amount of players even when they lost their coach, and they brought in some transfers that should help them out. And of course, that depends on what your definition of horrible is. When I think of a horrible football team, I usually think of teams like Vanderbilt and Colorado that are actually horrible football teams. And I don't think UCLA is as bad as either one of them, but I don't think they're a good team at all. And I think Nebraska's better, and I think it'll be close, but I think Nebraska wins this. So then they play on the road at USC. Nebraska, I think, will be able to score a decent amount of points in this game because even though I said USC's defensive roster looks good and it should be improved this year, I still don't trust Lincoln Riley at all on the defensive side of the ball. Uh, and USC, though, is still going to score a lot of points, I think, in this game. Nebraska's defense can probably slow them down a little bit, uh, but USC, I think, will outscore them and win by around a touchdown. So then they play Wisconsin at home, gonna be a really close one, maybe even an overtime game. So I could see this one going either way, but I think Wisconsin is a little bit better on the offensive side. Their quarterback is so much more experienced, and they've got a better running back unit, and I think a little bit better offensive line. Uh, and I do think Nebraska, though, probably has a little bit of an advantage at the wide receiver position because Wisconsin isn't really loaded at wide receiver, but Nebraska and Wisconsin are pretty similar at the safety position, but I think Wisconsin is stronger at cornerback and in the front seven, or well, at linebacker. Nebraska is stronger on the defensive line, but I think Wisconsin is just a little bit better team, and they get the win here. Mm. So then they end the season on the road at Iowa. So Iowa's defense is, I think, better than Nebraska's. Uh, the secondary is pretty similar, but Iowa, I think, has an advantage, and the front seven of the defense. And of course, Iowa won't score much in this game. They never score, even against a terrible defense. But playing at home, I think Iowa's defense will play really well and give Nebraska's freshman quarterback a really hard time. And I could see this game going either way. But I think playing at home, Iowa gets a really close, low scoring win. So my final prediction for Nebraska is mm, 7-5 overall and 4-5 in the conference. So they'll end their 8 years of missing a bowl game, but start 6-0 and lose 5 of their last 6 games. But that will be it with this video. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe, and I'll be back soon.